Hello. Most Warhammer books can be placed in a specific point in time by looking at the art that fills them. There have been many amazing eras of Warhammer art, each looking to explore these wonderful worlds in new and exciting ways. My guest today is Des Hanley, one of the artists responsible for so much of that amazing black and white art that filled Warhammer Armies books and Codex books throughout the 90s. We spoke about what it was like to create so much amazing art for so many incredible books, what it was like to work on all of that stuff during such a pivotal period in Warhammer's history, and the general challenges and opportunities of helping to shape the worlds of Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40,000. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with former Games Workshop artist Des Hanley. Des, thank you so much for joining me. I like to start these conversations by learning a little bit about your journey and where you first got started. So how did you become an artist?
I think, like many kids, I just drew. I just played. I drew on everything. If there wasn't paper around, I'd draw on the inside of cornflake boxes. Later on in my teens, I drew on my walls. Much to my parents. It's just I just had a drive to create. So whether that was in 3D with like plasticine or poster paints on a piece of cardboard, that's generally how I got started. And then I was reading things like 2000 AD, so I grew up on 2000 AD. So
right,
my favorite artists are from 2000 AD, pretty much.
Is that the kind of stuff that you would have been drawing at the time as well? Would it have been, spacemen and that sort of
weird little sort of comic strips, or drawing Judge Dredd, or Strontium Dog, or that kind of thing? But anything, I was, whatever took my fancy, I started to draw with. So I've just always been creative, if you will.
Right. Sure. And when did your relationship with Warhammer start? Were you into that before you started working at Games Workshop? Was that something?
Yeah, I think when I was in sixth form, I started role playing a lot. Started doing lots of like board games, role playing, playing D&D, and then we expanded from like just doing AD&D into board games. So things like Golden Heroes, and then it was like Rogue Trader, and then we kind of morphed from we do role playing, and then on the days when people couldn't be bothered to DM, then now would come something like Talisman, or whatever board games that are around at the time, and then from that it was a train journey into York to going to Games Workshop and then this is where the old Games Workshop, when it stocked multiple ranges, So then it was things like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, we'll play that, and miniatures, Rogue Trader, what's that? Pick that up, Come back home, and then it was things like, right, we need some figures, and then suddenly we're doing Rogue Trader battles, and it just cascaded, and then the switch happened with Games Workshop, where it became only Games Workshop products.
Mm-hmm.
Like White Dwarf switched from, because White Dwarf back then was a reference. I need it's got a campaign in it. It's got a D&D campaign. We'll do this, or it's got a Traveller campaign. We'll play that. And then it suddenly switched into only Games Workshop products, and so that drift was natural.
Sure, yeah. So, do you remember any of those? Like, were you collecting whole armies at that time then, or did you sort of move into that space as the game started to mature a bit?
When I moved and I shared a house with my friends in Leicester, and so on a board evening, or a Sunday when we didn't have anything to do because we were skinned, we'd play Fantasy Battle. But what we didn't have was loads of money. So what we had was stand-ins. We might have like 10 cavalry bases, but only one mounted figure.
Right.
So you'd put down the cavalry bases, and then the one mounted figure was your line of sight, and you'd move that into the space. Can I see that? Move that figure across. Or it got to the point with White Dwarf when they publish, here's a picture of a stone troll, nicely painted, that got stuck to a piece of cardboard and trimmed out and stuck onto a base,
Right.
Or our D&D miniatures suddenly were, rank and file knights or high elf spearmen, or. And so when we had the fantasy battle box set, the high elves versus the goblins, those high elves became Empire, they became Chaos, those goblins became, So, yeah, we didn't have lots of miniatures, but what we had, we used to play every army.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I remember those eras of it was lots of innovation and creative play, wasn't it? To make sure that you could explore these worlds and sort of play all of these different kinds of games, but without having to buy everything.
I think now, if you see people at tournaments when they've spent thousands of pounds on one army, and that's the only army they play, and you're going, well, have you thought about playing the high elves? I can't afford that. Well, you don't have to. just use a different figure. There's things like play all the armies. Just use the figures that you've got. You don't. I mean, that's different for going to a tournament, I suppose. Having to have and the miniatures that we did have, as we expanded, like those plastic high elves weren't painted, so they were just plastic. And then when we expanded more into it'd be Adeptus Titanicus and all epic, because obviously you got more figures for your buck.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Huge scale battles, and all you needed were just a handful of bases of guys. Well, that's. I mean, that obviously, having played a lot of the GW games and sort of grown up with the games themselves, how did you then come to find yourself working for Games Workshop?
I think being poor, I got tired of being poor, and I need a job. So I went to Games Workshop Leicester, and I applied for a job and didn't get it. So I became a part-timer at Games Workshop. And they needed stuff doing for their window for an army day. So I painted a big scene and stuck it to the window.
Right.
Wasn't brilliant, but and then the manager, whose name I've forgotten, got in contact with the area manager, and they went, "Oh, yeah, well, I can take your portfolio to the studio if you want." And I went, "Great, what portfolio?" and then sort of spent like a week drawing like crazy, just trying to create a portfolio of Games Workshop imagery for them to take to the studio. And the regional director took it to the studio. John Blanche had a look at it, liked one particular piece, one little section of one piece, and called me in for an interview. So, which was very strange.
I imagine an interview with John Blanche is quite an experience.
We did it in a pub.
Right. Okay. There you go.
I mean, yeah, I was overdraft. I went, it's an interview. I'll go in a suit. And then what a silly mistake that was. Because it wasn't a suit environment. Yeah, but he took me for lunch in a pub and we chatted and talked. And he was like, "Oh, I'll give you a shot. Give you 3 months probation, give you a shot, see how it turns out." And it happened. It did. I'm sure they were just desperate for artists, but because as I say, there was Wayne England, Dave Gallagher, and Mark Gibbons doing the black and white, and obviously John.
Right. Sure, yeah, and lots of art required for so much product that was coming out, right? Just
black and white. I mean, there's obviously you had people like Rich Wright doing floor plans stuff, but yeah, for black and white artists, they needed. So that was just like, because obviously I did the art. I went to art college, did various different bits and pieces. But when I was living in Leicester, I wasn't drawing at all. So I'd kind of been on a long creative break. And then that was suddenly, yoink, now you're dropped into a working.
Sure. And one of those early projects, I believe, that you sort of first got stuck into would have been Necromunda. Is that right?
That was later on. The first
or was it not one of the early ones?
the early one, the first one I did was one of the Ultramarines books.
Right. Okay.
Horrendous Ultramarine. Yeah, I look back on that now and just like, yeah, they're not good. But they're of their time. I had to run quickly. That's what I had to learn to run fast.
Right. Right.
From being not employed as a commercial illustrator to suddenly being a commercial illustrator and having to turn out product, because there's days you don't want to draw. There's days when you're, oh, I don't know what to draw.
Sure.
There's something like, come on, you've been paid for this. Come
on. Sure. Yeah. No time for sort of an artistic block.
Yeah.
When there's deadlines, right? But those. So this would for like Codex books and Warhammer Armies books at that time. A lot of those images would have been what, quarter page pieces, right?
The general format back then was you had your basic quarter page, which is essentially a quarter page of an A4 thing. We didn't draw them exactly; they were much bigger.
Yeah, what kind of size would you have been working at when you were illustrating this?
I mean, about A4 roughly. Right. It was on this wonderful thing, Frisk board, which no longer exists.
Right.
Which was like an art paper mounted on this hard board that could take washes without buckling. You could draw on it. Occasionally, your pencil would get through. But yeah, it was basically. I think when I started, I was just like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'll just do what Mark does.
Right.
I was attempting to do Mark Gibbonsy type stuff, but right, it's inks because they didn't sort of approach me and go, Des, what do you work in? So we can provide you with. He was like, there's the art cupboard. Get it done.
Right.
He was like, right, FW inks, that's black ink, that's white ink. Right, I've got some pencils. There's a rubber. Okay, what do you want me to draw? Oh, Space Marine. Okay.
I mean, that's a real trial by fire then, sort of learning as you're going there. Yeah. And I imagine as well the diversity of what you were working on, because there were so many like Codex books and Armies books coming out during that period. So this would have been, what, roughly the fourth and then the fifth edition of Warhammer Fantasy. It would have been the second and third editions of
40K. Any and everything. You like 1 week you'd be doing Space Marines, 1 week you'd be doing Ultramarines, and then the next week, I'm doing Tyranids, and then the week after, I'm doing Elves. So there was no, you're really good at this, So yeah, I joined in '94, and I think I did the Ultramarines, the Tyranids, Dark Elves, and then I think that's when we started on Necromunda.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because Necromunda would have been 95 around, wouldn't it? Yeah. Do you recall working on Necromunda? What was that project like?
That was guns for me. Guns, guns, and more guns. So
right. Would they have been like spotted? Like we literally just we need stuff on the page to show off all of the different types of weaponry and to give a flavor of the world, that kind of stuff.
Honestly, layout was nothing to do with me.
Right.
Essentially, I would just be given a brief. Obviously, I had big shoes to fill because obviously Kev Walker did all of the guns in the War Gear book, I think it was.
Oh, okay, sure, I follow you. Yeah.
Back then, so Kev Walker had done all of these fantastic gun illustrations, and it was things like I started doing, I think the stub pistol and the auto pistol I'd just done in ink. And then I was like, they're not right, but I can't go back and change them, And then so one of the massive pluses, right, for working for Games Workshop at that time, they had underneath the mezzanine all of the previous artwork in huge art chests.
Right.
So I could spend my lunchtime staring at original Paul Bonner artworks or Adrian Smith or Kev Walker's gun. I could get out Kev Walker's original gun illustrations and see and just look, right, okay. So he's done the wash and then he's added the ink and then that's created this like blue-grey. All right, that's cool. That's interesting. I'll try that. So I could revel in all the old art. I could go into Mark Gibbons' drawer. I could look at all of his stuff, So because I had a big shoe, I looked at Kev Walker's stuff, and then I went back and started doing it in sort of ink and white gouache, and it gave you a nice metallic-y, bluey sheen. which helped get the 3D-ness of the weapons. So I kind of really got into it. I just sat there surrounded by gun books, you know. But it kind of, it seemed like a long project. I seemed to be drawing guns for weeks. So it seems like I did the first two. They really liked the first two, and it seems like, and so I was volunteered to do all of the guns. So then I kind of started to play around with stuff rather than just doing a las pistol. Well, who made the las pistol? Well, it's going to be the Van Sars, isn't it? They're the techie people in the Hive. So I'm going to start putting little symbols like the VS stamped on it. Or I think the hand flamer had like 49K written on it.
Right.
As part of the registry on the gun, because that was actually my 49th picture I'd done for Games Workshop. So that's they separated, when you did it, it would be like DH001F. That's my first fantasy piece, or DH001K for 40K.
Right.
I filtered in little things like that on the weapons.
That's cool. That's really great.
Keep myself entertained, really.
Sure. I imagine you were wishing for some elves at that point.
Well, I mean, just, I quite liked it. Oh, that's a cool. Why can't I get to draw them? Or that's, I didn't draw. I don't think I drew any gangers at all for Necromunda. I just did guns. And so I think like I got to design some guns, which was interesting. Rather than just being a robot gun. So it seems like, ooh, what's the web pistol look like? Don't know. We haven't made one. What's the needle pistol look like? And I think Jez had done a rough sketch, so I got to elaborate from Jez's sketch. And sort of the weird thing, the kind of thoughts that you go through your head, right? So I go, okay, it's a web pistol. A web pistol. Is it a web pistol? The needle pistol, sorry. Say the needle pistol. It's an assassination device. So it's kind of like there was a Star Trek episode where they had the Klingons on and they disarmed them and they were in the prison. And then they were like, and then they took this piece off their armband and a piece off their shoe and they clicked it together. And then they took a bit off his spine and they clicked that together. And suddenly they've got a working disruptor gun, right? So that's how I viewed the needle pistol. So it seems like, well, that breaks off here and that can be, so that clicks off here and that clicks in here. So it seems like this weapon is made up of lots of different parts that you can secrete around yourself because it's assassination. A web pistol, you're going to have little canisters that you have to fit in, and then that clicks over here, and then so all of that helped my brain process, but it also made the weapons feel more real. So,
yeah, because that's like
they've lacked. So.
Yeah, sorry, I spoke over you there, Des.
No, it's okay. That's fine.
Well,
so,
I'm just going to do it again, Des. You go, please.
Because if you can make it, because they looked real, kind of, they're a bit flat now when I look at them, obviously, but 25 years have passed. So, but they've lasted after I left. They're still going. They still pop up on occasions, and people still talk about them. So that it's nice to leave a mark.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and that is all storytelling and world building through all of that sort of stuff. Like that, there's so much character and so much story in just those weapon pieces, because it does flesh out the world and it does say, look, it's not just everyone's getting a weapon off of a rack and then that's like how it works. There are things where people are having to build these and strap them together, and like you say, there's assassination tools and all sorts. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of it. I think initially, and probably the majority of my Space Marine pictures, you weren't allowed to vary. So sometimes it just felt you were drawing a plastic miniature. So some of my very early Space Marines just look like plastic miniatures, and they're in the same proportion. So when you look at them, you're going, how does a person fit inside that? Well, they don't. Well, I'm not drawing a person. I'm drawing this plastic miniature because that's what they're telling me to do. Take this plastic miniature and draw it. Okay, if that's what you want. So now, when you see it, you see the artwork nowadays, and they're like, the artwork is different to the miniatures. The artwork is no, it looks like a proper Space Marine, an 8 foot tall physical being in a suit, rather than just. Hasn't he got a big head? Hasn't he got massive hands? Hasn't he got a gigantic sword? That the miniatures have to have, or did have back in the early 90s for casting reasons. But yeah, when you look at some of my early Space Marines, they're like 6 heads high, because I'm drawing a plastic Space Marine.
Right.
They look awesome.
I think there's a lot of character to them, though. That was like of its time as well, right? That was sort of the approach for some of it back then.
As I mentioned before, that there wasn't. Nobody came in and said, draw everything cartoony.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just the way it was.
Right.
Everything seemed to be stylized, I'd say. The stuff that Gallagher was painting and his covers was cartoony. The stuff that Mark was doing, Mark's stuff was fantastic, but it was very comic book.
Sure.
And there's that kind of proportional things. Some of the stuff you go great, and other stuff you go, what am I doing? What's this? I say my job was to do black and white art, not to design stuff.
Right.
And that was very clear. Just draw what we're giving you.
Sure.
Make an illustration from this.
Right.
I want a Space Marine shooting. Okay. No, it's going to be shooting. Okay.
Do you remember much about working? Because I believe your art is in all of the like scenario packs that were produced during that period as well. So these were like Circle of Blood, Grudge of Drong. There was a Storm of Vengeance for 40k as well.
I mean, essentially, whatever I drew was theirs to do with whatever they wanted.
Right. So it might just be you were told to, okay, we need this many zombies or skeletons or what have you, and then they're.
Well, generally, we would start a project, we would work on the project, and then that was done, and we move on to another project.
Sure.
That artwork was free to be used in White Dwarf, supplements. They owned all the rights of publishing to do. I worked in-house, so none of it belonged to me. It was all Games Workshop, and even after I left, when I did some stuff for the Games Workshop collectible card games,
right,
that artwork popped up in Games Workshop.
Of course, yeah.
They could. It's ours. We can do with what we want. We can stick on a T-shirt. We can throw on a mug. We can, if they can take this and they can put it in this scenario. I don't know. It's got nothing to do with me.
Sure,
That was done months ago. We're on to something new. So.
Of course, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess, did you perhaps remember Gorkamorka, which I think was perhaps more of a, I would imagine was a more memorable process.
No, that was kind of fun to do. I mean, just to jump back, I got after I'd left Games Workshop, I got a package with the, what was it? From Black Library, which was the Rogue Trader role-playing game?
There was one.
And it was things like, I don't remember doing any work for that, but they used my guns. They put my guns in the book. So therefore I got a credit, therefore I got a free book.
Right, okay. So this would have been the Black Industry, so they did Rogue Trader, they did Dark Heresy, and they did a couple of different role-playing games.
Yeah, it was Dark Heresy. It was a big, thick role-playing game that they got. But because they'd used the Necromunda guns in the book, so I got a credit. Therefore, I got a free copy. So
okay, I mean, and that's a number of years later, right? That would have been like 10 years later, almost, maybe even more.
Yeah, because I got a credit, I got a free book. So
fantastic! That's great. Yeah, but yeah, so the Gorkamorka, I mean, that you sort of hear stories that was quite a quick project that was put together relatively quickly. Was that your recollection from sort of in the art?
Games wise, I wasn't really involved. I mean, I might have play tested some of it. When the game designers were writing a game, obviously they need it to be played. They need to test it. Mm-hmm. So throughout the time I was there, waves of games went round the studio.
Right.
So, like when More Time was being developed, suddenly I'm creating a Dark Elf gang to do some play testing. You know, when Gorkamorka came out, everyone started building Mad Max vehicles with orcs and stuff on it. Yeah, so it kind of just swept it up. So I've read that it was a rush job, but I didn't experience. I wasn't there when they wrote it. They were over there, and we were. You know what I mean? We were the art department. We had our own little section. The games designers were over there. You know, we went and bugged them for ideas like, what's this about? Who's this figure that I'm supposed to be drawing? You know, kind of have some background. But we weren't involved at all in any of the games, so I don't know what was rushed and what wasn't.
Right.
So it was just another project that came along that we had to illustrate. But yeah, it was all very much, Mad Max.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I think the only thing I really remember about with Gorkamorka, we really wanted to do Paul Bonner orcs because that just seemed right. If Paul Bonner was working for Games Workshop at the time, guaranteed he would have done the best Gorkamorka art. You know, I grew up with like War the Orcs and all of that, and all the Paul Bonner orcs and stuff. And we were like, "Can we do Paul Bonner orcs?" And they were like, "No, draw them as they are." So it was a lot of orcs suddenly getting longer in the face. Let's stretch that out, But yeah, it was very much trying to build buggies, paint figures, and then drawing cool Mad Max scenes. I think the way I draw, when I create things, it's a little movie in my head. So I'm watching it. And then I have to hit pause, like a video, and it goes, and it's all fuzzy. And so I get about 80% of the thought. And then when I draw it onto the paper, I get about 60% of what's up in here because it's not moving. And I'm only focusing on, if you play a video, if you pause the video and you go, right, there's the character, that's great, I can see him, but what's going on in the rest? I don't know, that's all kind of fuzzy. That's fine in your head, but when you have a piece of paper and you draw the character and then you go, well, what's this stuff over here? And you go, well, I don't know because it's all fuzzy, but I have to draw it. So I did a lot of stuff where I had characters walking through mist because I really didn't want to draw feet. Feet aren't interesting. I mean, part of the downside of doing a quarter page is this rectangle and it has a hard border. So you end up drawing everything. I can remember when I was doing the Dark Elves, and this is just the poor commercial artist in me. I was painting each individual ring of chainmail, going, why am I doing this? Why am I? When technically, when I'm more proficient, it's, well, that's in shadow, and I'm just doing the occasional highlight, and the brain says that's chainmail. But no, I was painting every individual chainmail ring, and that's why I ended up with a very flat picture because I killed it.
Right.
When you go from a really loose sketch, and you transfer it onto a board, you've just destroyed all of those movement lines because you've done it on some like layout paper, quick sketch, and then you get a tracing paper, or you go on the inside and you put your pencil down and you put it onto your hardboard and you draw it out to a thing, and then you take it all off and you go, because you've drawn this slow line, tracing this outline, you've killed any movement of the pencil. Because the board was great and you could paint on it, but you couldn't repeatedly erase things. You couldn't draw on and then erase, draw on and erase, because essentially you'd rough up the surface.
Right.
Take the surface off the paper. So generally it was always sketching a layout pad, then transfer it to the board, and then render it. Sometimes the transferring and the rendering just killed any movement.
Right.
But I think in about 97 or 98, Fisk went bust. They stopped making the board. And so we suddenly had to try and find a replacement. And we went through just like, I did some just on art paper. But you treat it the same and then it just buckles. And you're like, hang on, I have to start wetting the paper, sticking it like the old fashioned with the tape so it doesn't buckle. Please find a replacement for the board. Because, it just slows you down. So, but yeah, so I forgot what I was talking about.
That's just so interesting, though. Just like from like a technical perspective, like almost at times too much detail, too much care, and too much deliberate action can cost some of the dynamism maybe of the piece. It sounds like.
I think it's a bit like when you see a photograph today, people focus in on the one thing and then everything else is blurry. But when you're an artist, you have to discipline yourself to do the same sort of thing. Compositionally, you have to go, what is my primary focus? All right. So, boom, I want this character to be my primary focus. How do I get my viewers to look at where I want them to? Well, you do that through secondary focus, So you can go, right, here's the figure. I'm going to put a lot of effort into the face and around the head and shoulders because that's where I want people to look. And then the rest down here can be dark and shadowy because he's got a strong light coming on his face. And then the cloak comes here because I want people to enter the picture and it's like a big arrow that's going to say, look here. Whereas when I was doing the stuff for Games Workshop, I was going, I'm focusing on his head. I will render up his head. Now I'm focusing on his chest. Now I'm rendering up his chest. Now I'm focusing on his leg. Now I'm rendering up his leg. And suddenly everything is fully rendered and you're not looking at anything.
Right. I get you.
So that was my error. So.
Right. But then I guess that's also learning and sort of growing as an artist and part of your journey.
Yeah, I guess. But it just meant for some poor art that I cringe to look at nowadays. When it pops up on Instagram, it's always like, ooh, please, get down.
I think because obviously we sort of mentioned there's a large number of like armies books and codex books that you worked on across your time at GW. Did you ever have a preference whether that was for a particular army or 40k or fantasy? Was there anything that always sort of spoke to you more?
Now at Games Workshop they have an art team that is Age of Sigmar and an art team that is 40k. I think I'm definitely more happy doing fantasy rather than straight lines. The worst thing they could do for me is give me a tank to draw,
right?
Or a vehicle, because it's like, how do I make that dynamic? It's straight lines, and if I don't get the perspective right, it's going to look, if you've got a rhino on the table, if you own a rhino and I've drawn a rhino and it's not the perspective's off, you're going to go, well, that's a little rubbish. It doesn't look like a rhino. Because it's a rhino. How am I supposed to fit 10 Space Marines inside? Because if you do a rhino with 10 Space Marines inside it, and then you look at your rhino, you go, this is half the size it needs to be.
Yeah.
It needs to be huge to fit 10 Space Marines in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hated doing hard line stuff. So.
Right. And then, so within the fantasy space, was there ever a particular, like, was it the Dark Elf book, or were there any other books that you were like, that was my favorite to work on?
I quite liked the Undead. I quite liked Chaos, because I think more with Chaos. I think the one time I got to be a little freer was when I did the Horrors of Zinch. Was it the Horrors? Which was essentially I just put ink all over the page, and once the ink dried, you end up with like varying degrees. There's more ink here, less ink here, and it offers little shapes. And then from those little shapes, I could pull out little faces. Because they're emerging from the warp. Then Battlefleet Gothic was another one I enjoyed.
Right.
But again, it's because it's a movie in my head. So when I'm drawing the horrors of Zinch, it's kind of like, oh, there's a face and it's emerging, coming in, and oh, there's another face. Oh, but they're not they're not. It's just. I'm not drawing a plastic figure on the tabletop.
Sure.
So there's a little freer, wisps of magic. But yeah, so there's some art I did for the Chaos book, which is influenced other people and still around today. That's nice. So the Lord of Change that I did with the Zinchian helmet,
right?
And then I did the Zinch head, and I'd done like a Zinch helmet on his head, and it had all the dark rune writing on it that said things
right.
on that piece. In a pastiche of Realms of Chaos, that's the kind of I wanted to dip into Realms of Chaos and bring it into the modern image that I was doing it for today, So that kind of stuff. And then I think that I know some Golden Demon guy converted the Lord of Change figure to match the artwork.
Right.
And I think Trish Morrison, who had to sculpt the Lord of Change, she had to put the helmet on the Lord of Change. So that's nice when you do something and it sticks around.
Right.
I don't know if he's still around now, but he kind of pops up here and there. So
sure,
it's nice when you leave a mark and it stays. So.
I'll bet. Yeah, I mean, just on that, you mentioned Battlefleet Gothic there. I would have thought that would have been because that's more
weird.
Straight line.
That's weird because there's a difference between going, I've got to draw tank tracks, this tiny little interlocking plates and a wheel, and it's a turret. To it's a big spaceship, like aliens. It's the Sulaco coming through, and it's them emerging from the warp. All of these are a movie in my head.
Sure.
I really should do movies, but it's like the warp opening and then the ship's emerging. That I try to do, but they're big bricks. They're easy. It's a long rectangle with a cool pointy bit. So I suppose more architectural than tanks. But again, I don't like drawing architecture either. So I don't know why Battlefleet Gothic. But yeah, that was cool to do.
Sure, yeah. I'm curious about like the actual, I suppose like how art was briefed and the sort of approaches that were taken. Like, were you working towards a house style or any of that kind of stuff, or how did the actual process of getting an art brief and delivering to that, how did that work?
I mean, pretty much your art manager would be, here's your brief. And that's really, really interesting. But you'd be like, we need a dark elf spearman illustration, goes on this page. Go and draw me a dark elf spearman.
Right.
But you were when I first started, and for the majority all the way through, it was in a box. It was either vertical rectangular box or a horizontal box. And you would have half page, you had a quarter page, half page, and then if you got lucky, a full page. Sometimes it generally went, you had a brief, they wanted it done in 3 days, pretty much.
Right.
Sometimes it took longer. If it took too long, they'd come and poke you, take it too long, move it on, we've got other stuff. You're putting too much into it, keep it simple, bang it out. And that would be every day, pretty much. It would be, here's your brief, 3 days, get it done if you can, done, next, here's your next brief. And that was 50 weeks a year. So there wasn't a lot of, there was freedom. It was, ideally what they wanted was your first day, you explore your picture, you do a couple of sketches. Second day, you start your picture. Third day, you finish your picture. So it's very tight. I suppose they wanted commercial artists it's a product, get it done, rather than artists who want to explore themes.
Right.
So in comparison to, say, some of the stuff that you see nowadays, when, oh, it's a Space Marine talking to some Tau by Paul Dayton, which is fantastic, we didn't ask you to do this, that's not what we want. It was, here's some Space Marines, we want them shooting. It was, our first art manager was like, he was very much into Tom Kirby and the Commando books, the little square 1970s,
right,
all odd for boys, and that was all,
sure.
So it was always like, they want, it's a war game, so do war. So Space Marine shooting to the left, Space Marine shooting to So that's what we did, and house style, I'd say it wasn't, nobody came in and said, make it comic-y. Nobody, it was just, it's like the stuff that Dave Gallagher was doing and the stuff that, was kind of realistic, comic-y, bright. Everything was bright. If you look at the figure painters, everything was bright, pingy and sharp, and the color art was bright and pingy and sharp. And the stuff that Mark Gibbons was doing, although realistic, was still comic book, I'd say,
Sure.
that comic book element to it, with a certain, some of it was comic-y, you'd give him, get Mark to do squigs and goblins, he'd do something kind of comic-y. So that kind of bled into what you were doing. When I was dropped in running, that was, what do I do? Draw like that, and so that sort of did it. And then when they brought in people like John Wigley, he already had that kind of style and the same sort of thing. I think he was in the same boat. How do I draw? What do you want me to draw like? Like those, right? Okay. And so it just naturally fell into this bright, comic-y feel.
Sure.
Sometimes you try and go a bit darker. I think later on, when you're doing undead, it's very hard to do undead comic. Well, you can, but you want to explore more. You want, everything had to be clean, I'd say. So, for instance, when we did the Dark Eldar, now, if you've got someone like an homunculus who likes skinning people, and you want to put that, you can't draw him skinning someone. You know what I mean? It's got to go in a rule book, which is for 14 years and up. So, you can't do exposed breasts. You can't, they have to be covered by smoke or a hand or, so everything had to be tidy for press. So you had to limit, you couldn't do Space Marine ripping someone's head off. Not that I'm saying that it was necessary, but there's a certain, it was a very clean war.
Sure.
There was no blood and gore. I mean, that came later. In the later products, you see a bit more people being eviscerated and knifed and stuff. But that wasn't something that we were allowed to do. Nor we were allowed to, I think I mentioned earlier, sign your work. We weren't allowed to sign our work, but we did get a book.
Sure. Yeah. So you couldn't. Like you weren't allowed to put a signature alongside a piece, but the credits were still being included at that time, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was a house look, and I'm sure people could be able to see their favorite artist's work, just because of their style, that there would be no signature on the piece because it was a game. It's not your piece, it's Games Workshop's piece.
Right.
You get credit in the front, but you're just, it's got to fit into the book. It's not an art book. It's, so we don't have to credit you per picture. This is the Bretonnians, and everyone thinking this is all about Bretonnians. It's not about Des Hanley Bretonnians. It's not about really Bretonnians. This is the Game Workshop Bretonnians, and they all have to fit into the book. So no signatures.
Right.
Pretty much.
I guess one last question as well, Des, actually, if that's all right. From when you first started, you joined around 95, you left around 99. Did the culture at GW shift, or did like the nature of Games Workshop as a company, as a place to work, did that change notably?
Yeah, pretty much. I think
Right.
when I first started, we were at a place called Castle Boulevard, which was it was a much smaller building. And the artist, the first room I was in, I was in a room with Gary Morley, Dave Andrews, Richard Wright, and me, and we were at the front of the building. And then about 2 months after that, they moved me and Rich to a little building at the back called Hope Drive. That had me in it, it had Dave and Wayne in it, it had the Perrys in it, it had Jess Goodwin in it. And then so we were kind of separate off from production. And then we were in there. And then when they hired John Wigley, then they had to start fitting people in little spaces. And then somebody had a bright idea of going, hey, let's put all of the artists into the boardroom. So they emptied out the boardroom, and then they took all of the artists and they stuck us all in one big room.
Right.
Sounds great, because it keeps us all in one place. But imagine, I always suppose it would be the classical 40k, a bunch of hunched over monks over little tables, scrolling. That's what we were like. And then when we moved to Lenton, when they bought the bigger place and they brought everything in, then it became much more corporate. It was open plan office. So we weren't in a room. Now we were in an open plan office, which can be very distracting when you're trying to concentrate. If all you've got is a little blue board to separate you from somebody else, there's people passing, or if they're bringing around investors, or because they used to bring their indoctrinated red shirts they bring for a tour,
Right.
Around Games Workshop. So that you'd be working away, and all of a sudden there'd be like 30 people in red shirts around you, and you'd be like, what? Oh, well, that's broken my flow, So, but it was very much wandering management and open plan offices, so it became much more corporate, rather than. It was like a little art community at Hope Drive, because it was just me and Rich in a room drawing away, and if you needed something like a book, you go up and see Wayne, have a quick chat, take a book away, come back down, Whereas at Lenton, we had key cards, and they would monitor your time away from your desk. I don't remember in a meeting, without ranting, they was kind of like, you're having too many breaks. Because we can see when you leave the building and when you can come back in and what you're doing. It wasn't monitored toilet breaks, but beep every time you want to leave to go and get a cup of tea, go for a cigarette, beep, let yourself out, let yourself back in. So it's very much more corporate,
Right.
At the end. But yeah, and I think it's still the same.
Like post Games Workshop, you've done lots of work in a lot of different places, but I know you did some like BattleTech and stuff like that. I mean, was that quite fun, quite different to?
I mean, after I left Workshop, I was kind of a little tired of illustration. I didn't leave Games Workshop well when I left.
Right.
I did it because I needed the money. I was doing this freelance work. So if someone offered me a job, I'd say yes. And so,
Right.
yeah, it's fine. They're just big robots, but
Right.
they're just big robots. They're cool, but I wouldn't like to draw them every day.
Sure.
And I've done some other games, where it's just a job.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fair enough, right? Sure.
Yeah, whatever. I'll draw that. Sure.
You've moved then further towards like concept work for miniatures and things like that, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did a few. I did maybe one concept piece for Games Workshop whilst I was there. When I worked with Gary Morley to do the Wood Elf Glade Riders.
Right.
Not the horses, just the initial Glade Riders, which was a bit sort of loosely Byzantium kind of. And then they didn't let me do anything else. So I thought, oops, must have failed on that. But yeah, I mean, after I left workshop, I ended up doing a big project with Chris Fitzpatrick to do their Crocodile Game stuff.
Right.
Sort of in that was coming up with concepts for miniatures and stuff. And then, yeah, and then strangely, it's a very small world. The genre that I'm in is a very small world. Mm. So I was out at Gen Con doing Croc Games when I ran into Mike McVeigh.
Right.
He was working for Wizards. And we got chatting, and he was like, "Oh, you do concepts, aren't you?" "Yeah." "Good. Send me an email. I've got some work for you." So in a very small world, I ended up doing a lot of concepts for the D&D miniature line and Star Wars for their collectible miniature game. You collect the miniatures, but I do lots of concepts for them. And then from that into other companies doing concepts. So basically, if you've got any miniatures, I've probably contacted someone.
Right.
Like all companies, you know, they've done Mir, Hasbro, yeah, you name it. So
amazing. Amazing. Well, Des, it has been absolutely fantastic to chat to you. Thank you so much for joining me, for taking the time. Yeah, just really good stuff. Thank you. Thank you so much to Des for spending some time to chat to me about such an important and fascinating period of Games Workshop history. It was a real pleasure. Thank you, Des. If you would like to support the work that I do here, researching and documenting the history of Games Workshop and Warhammer, and speaking to the people who were so influential in creating it all, then you can do so by checking out my Patreon via the link in the description below. Thank you once again to Des. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.